Hey guys, welcome back to the Theoretical Guitarists. Last week we put up a playthrough of my new song, Get Off My Bus, and today we're going to go over some of the songwriting ideas and tools that I use to write this song and how you can apply them in your stuff. If you haven't seen the playthrough, feel free to go check it out now, or there will be a link at the end of the video for you. Let's get into it. Let's start off by getting in tune. Like the majority of the material I write, this song is in drop C. The majority of the song is in D Phrygian, with a couple notes borrowed that don't necessarily fit inside the key, but help create tension when leading back to the tonal center. D Phrygian shares the same key signature as B flat major and G minor. The Phrygian mode is very similar to Aeolian, or natural minor. It is built exactly the same, but with the second degree of the scale lowered. Because of this, it feels even darker and more tense than natural minor, and can be used to make your music feel more unstable or aggressive. Another good example of Phrygian being used in metal is Metallica's Creeping Death. Here's a quick demonstration of the natural minor scale and then the Phrygian mode, both in D. Hear the difference? Amazing what lowering one note in a scale can do, right? The flat 2 just feels wrong in comparison to the natural minor scale, but it will serve very useful in leading us back to the tonal center in a less conventional way throughout the song. Alright, let's jump into the riffs so we can see it in context. I open up the song with a riff that sounds to me like it could have been on Linkin Park's debut album. This riff is very reminiscent of early 2000s nu metal, using simple power chords, scratchy dead notes, and natural harmonics for an industrial feel. This is also the first instance of the flat 2 leading back to D, setting up the next riff. Here's a quick demonstration of the riff slowed down. The rest of the instruments join in for the next section, which recurs multiple times with slight variation throughout the song to help tie it all together. Fast-moving power chords and natural harmonics help characterize this riff as the song picks up pace a little bit more and becomes a bit more frantic. Here's this section slowed down. At the end of this riff, you'll notice a chord that feels out of place. How does a C sharp come into play in D Phrygian? Well, while it's technically not included in the key signature, it's only a half step away from the tonal center of D, and thus is called a leading tone. The C sharp will also be used liberally throughout the song to add more tension and make the song super edgy, like chug a monster and smash some drywall edgy. I should have named this song Kyle. Where'd all my strings go? What is this? Sometimes it really helps me to switch things up and pick up the bass to create a foundation for the chords and lead lines to sit over the top. I definitely recommend it if you feel like you're in a rut trying to write new material on guitar. Believe it or not, this next section actually started out as a bass line. Here's a quick demo of the bass line that lies underneath the verses. The key takeaway from this riff is the turnaround at the end, which is used at various points in the song to link each riff together. This and one other variation are used pretty frequently, so here's a demonstration of each turnaround. That's better. The second turnaround leads into a variation of the intro riff, which is followed by the chorus, which is basically just abuse of octaves and add 9 chords. I love add 9s. They're very easy to play and move around in drop tuning and can add a little extra flavor to a basic power chord. To build an add 9 chord, take your basic 3-string power chord and then add your pinky or your ring finger on the 4th string 2 frets higher. Now that you know what an add 9 looks like and how to build it, here it is in the context of the chorus, shifted around with some octaves thrown in between. From there, we see another variation of the second riff, followed by a variation of the verse. Then the chorus repeats, leading into the last new riff of the song, the bridge section. At this point, the tempo reduces to halftime and the tonal center shifts to C while still maintaining a Phrygian feel. The leading tone mentioned earlier is what ties this section to the rest of the song and makes it work, even though switching the tonal center from D to C should feel jarring and out of place. In C Phrygian, the flat 2 is D flat, also known as C sharp, so it's no coincidence that I used that to draw the song to C, and we'll use it to lead from C back to D at the end of the section. Here's the bridge section, slowed down. At the end of the section, I land on the C sharp and throw in a natural harmonic on the 5th fret to give the song some continuity and reel it back in for the chorus. The last chorus is doubled, and on the second run through, it's solo time. I won't be going through each lick note by note, but rather focusing on what scales and notes are being used and how they function with the chords underneath them. Tabs will be on screen for each demonstration, so feel free to pause and take a closer look if you want to know what's going on more precisely. To get a better understanding of why I chose the melody lines that I did for this solo, we're going to break it up into chunks and take a look at each lick as it relates to the chords underneath it. The chord progression underneath the solo is identical to the chorus, a D power chord with add 9s shifted all over the place afterwards. The cool part about using standard power chords and add 9s underneath the solo is that you can manipulate the tonality depending on the lead line that you're playing over them. What I mean is that power chords and add 9s do not contain the 3rd or the 7th of the chord, so they don't really imply whether or not they're major or minor. Because of this, you can manipulate the tonality of each chord by playing different scales and notes over them. I'll explain this concept a little more thoroughly as we go on, so let's just take a look at the first lick. This is a very simple Iron Maiden-esque minor pentatonic lick. Go check out the song we did in the style of Iron Maiden. It's pretty cool, I promise. It starts off with a unison bend on the 14th fret of the F string, followed by a descending run, grabbing the 15th fret of the A string, and then landing back on the 14th fret of the F string. Because we are playing a minor pentatonic scale over the D chord, we can assume that that chord in that moment is functioning as a D minor. The next part of the solo is a bouncy intervallic run, followed up by a pedal tone lick. Let's take a look. I find the most challenging part of this lick to be the slide from the 15th fret to the 22nd fret on the D string, especially using your pinky to do so. But in the interest of keeping it ergonomic and setting up the following lick, it's necessary. The pedal tone lick at the second half of this section is based on D and sets up a nice anticipation for when we modulate and land on the A flat. Here's the next portion of the solo. Within the first 2 notes of this section, the tonality of the chord underneath is defined. The A flat that we land on to start the phrase is the 9th of the G flat chord underneath it, which, if you remember, is the note that we would use to take the power chord and turn it into an add 9. Bending that up a half step gives us our minor third, which indicates that the chord is acting as a G flat minor add 9. Another thing worth observing here is where I decided to play each note on the fretboard. For example, rather than continuing the run down vertically to the 12th fret of the C string, I decided to slide to the 7th fret on the same string, leaving my ring finger open and available to slide back up to the 11th fret. Take a look back at the tab and take note of how I choose to move the melody across the fretboard to make this run as ergonomic as possible. Alright, on to the next one. At this point, we've returned to the good old D5, but we're going to approach it a little differently this time. I wanted this section to feel triumphant, like we had overcome something. Like finally, after a long, hard battle, we got that guy off the dang bus. So, to accomplish this, I chose to start the lick with an F sharp, which would take that D power chord and turn it into a D major chord. This is the beauty of using ambiguous chords underneath your solos. As I previously mentioned, you can manipulate these types of chords just by playing different scales or notes over them, and it gives you so many different options when defining the tonality of the piece in that moment. Hopefully now you have a decent understanding of what I mean, and now you can go apply that to your own stuff and see what kind of wacky melodies you can create. Next lick, incoming. This lick is a variation of an idea that I picked up a few years back from a John Petrucci solo. I love this lick because it's a fairly easy way to cover a lot of ground on the fretboard very quickly. This is a great example of moving diagonally across the fretboard, connecting different scale shapes by sliding from one to the next. Speaking of covering a lot of ground quickly, we then outline some add 9 shapes to climb back up the fretboard. Yes, I even use add 9s in my solos. It is a disease. This brings us to the final section of the solo and the end of the song. Calling back to the first section of the solo, I throw in some more unison bends to provide some continuity and tie the solo together. They work really well here to make the melody line sound more dissonant and tense. You'll notice that to finish off the solo, we land right back in the D minor pentatonic shape that we started in. Well, that's pretty much it. To recap, here are the main takeaways from this song. The Phrygian mode is a darker, angrier version of natural minor and can be used to create tension and aggression in a song. Natural harmonics are really useful when working towards an industrial type feel. Building a song around a bass line can be a very effective way to switch things up and inspire some creativity. Add 9 chords are really stinking cool. Using variations of a riff or turnaround can help change things up and keep a song sounding fresh while still providing continuity. You can manipulate the tonality of a basic power chord or an add 9 chord by playing different scales over them. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys can take some of the ideas that I used for this song and apply it to your own stuff in the future. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed what you saw, and we'll see you guys next Friday. Okay.
Today Jake teaches how to make
The lesson you didn't know you were here for. You can take a can of sweetened condensed milk. If you have an Instant Pot, you just like open it and then seal it again with tin foil, put it in the Instant Pot, and then you fill up water like 3/4 of the way up the can and just put it in for like 40 minutes. And then you pull it out, right? It's like bubbling in the can. Then you can like peel the top off after you let it cool for a minute. And then you just like dump it out into another bowl or something, and it's just like this thick caramel sauce. And then you can like stir it with like a whisk. It's so crazy. You can make it on the stove too. I ate like 4 apples and caramel sauce yesterday.